Jose Velez, founder, Rely.
Hello, everyone. So, there's a lot of investors and founders in the room, and whether investing or leading your own company, I'm guessing everyone wants the blueprint for a successful company, right? Well, I'm not going to give you one, but there's a lot of things that actually correlate with a successful company. Actually, the factor that has proven to have the highest correlation with a successful company is the developer experience and how fast you're shipping meaningful new updates. There you go. I actually think it was Dalai Lama, if I'm not mistaken, that said the success of a product is directly correlated to the developer experience of the company. All right, yeah, like perhaps I'm misquoting Dalai Lama, and I think that's a picture of Justin Trudeau, whatever, but the point still stands, right? So without a good developer experience, you just are going to be left behind. Yet, the reality is that the DevX of most companies sucks. And according to Google's State of DevOps report, 3 hours per day of the developers are spent on like non-core work. Can you imagine that? It's like, yeah, 40%. Not to mention that most of them, like a third roughly, end up leaving their company because they don't like the experience that they provide to ship new software. So how did we end up here? So over the years, with the whole DevOps movement and the whole shift left, where basically more and more responsibilities are added to developers, they just became overloaded with the amount of cognitive load that they're tasked with. They're basically tasked with building the software, operating it, shipping it, monitoring, troubleshooting it, so on and so forth. More and more, the responsibilities are on them. Naturally, it's just too much for anyone to know. So, especially today, when the complex cloud environments are getting even more complex. So, a bunch of the different tools that were designed for DevOps engineers, SREs, etc., are now given to the developers who naturally don't have the same backgrounds. And architectures and infrastructure are becoming more distributed. That means like hundreds of different microservices that interact with each other, that have a lot of dependencies that are not well documented. And it was in response to this shift, and that's perhaps why you might have heard about it, that platform engineering started to become the next big thing. So platform engineering is basically a practice that outlines how organizations should assemble a dedicated team. Instead of having, for example, the DevOps or the SRE teams doing the work, this dedicated platform engineering team is tasked with building the internal developer platform, or the IDP, which you probably might have heard. And this IDP is basically a self-service layer between the developers and the infrastructure, the technologies, the tools, and the processes to basically remove and abstract this complexity from them. Now, So a lot of you are probably asking, if this is such a big problem, why are we only hearing about it now? Well, the reality is that the number of tools that we're giving to developers to work on a day-to-day basis has been growing a lot. And that has basically, especially with AI, right now what's going to happen is that this is going to increase even faster. It's going to become easier to build new tools. Naturally, that's good because it reduces the time to market. But the downside is that the complexity of the workflow of the developers is just going to keep increasing. So what will happen between now and the time that we'll basically bow down to the AI supreme overlords and all of the developers are going to be out of a job? Okay, I'm kidding, of course, don't. Joking aside, what will actually happen is that more and more tools are going to come out, right? And basically, it's going to come out new technology at a pace that we're not prepared for. And all of these new technologies that are going to be coming out are going to be given to the developers, and it's just going to be too fast for them to keep up with all of the new technology that's out there. And that is why platform engineering is going to basically abstract this complexity so that as new technology comes out, it's embedded into the internal developer platform so that the developers don't have to basically keep up with everything that's coming out. While this is still an early space, and there's a lot of different misconceptions around what is an IDP and what are the different components, and naturally because of that, there's a lot of different players out there that claim to be an IDP. So I'm going to break it down like what an internal developer platform means, at least according to the different standards, right? So under the developer experience plane, we're basically grouping the primary interfaces that the developers interact with. So there's the IDE, where the developers write the code. There's the version control. So Scott did a wonderful job building it and explaining it. And there's the developer portal. And basically, the developer portal is the entry point to the internal developer platform. So to all of the tools that are in the stack of the internal developer platform for the developers. Then the integration and delivery plane contains like all of the tools that build, store, manage the code available all the moment until it's available to the users. It also abstracts the complexity of managing and orchestrating workloads and infrastructure, and this is where actually most of the players that claim to be an IDP fall into, even though that in reality they're like a point solution that, for example, abstracts the complexity of Kubernetes or whatever. The resource plane, like the cloud providers, etc., includes all of the different resource components that are necessary to basically run your apps to be available to the users. The observability plane provides real-time dashboarding and alerting for application and infrastructure. You need to make sure that you understand how things are working. And the security plane and internal tool planes pretty much being self-explanatory. But as you can see, even with a simplified high-level overview, it's a very, very complex system. So this is the beauty of the internal developer portal. It basically abstracts all of this complexity, and it basically bakes these best practices, all of the different best practices that the developers should follow using the different tools, into a golden path that the developers can follow without having to know everything about all of the different tools. And these are the problems that we're solving with Rely.io. The goal is to provide a carefully designed, unified experience that basically abstracts the complexity throughout the different developer routines that they have to go through on a daily basis. This gives teams basically one portal to build, ship, operate, and improve their software, and it puts them on a path towards engineering excellence. And the reality is that the best companies out there are already using developer portals and getting incredible returns. So much so that some of the ones that built their own version of a developer portal, like Spotify with Backstage, they realized that this is where the money is, and they started to double down on. So you might be asking, if this is a problem that's already solved, why are we building Rely then? So the reality is that it's still not meeting the expectations of the developers. And for example, Backstage, that's the one that's the most adopted out there, they actually provide an open source framework to build a developer portal. So this means that you actually have to have a team dedicated to it, and those efforts scale with the size of the company. So the total cost of ownership is actually $150,000 for each developer, because you actually have to code and design the experience of the developer portal. You need to understand all of the user journeys that the developers have to go through, and how you provide the information and the actions that they can do in a way that's intuitive, etc. Among other things. So on top of that, it's a space where there are going to be multiple billion-dollar outcomes. So there's companies like ServiceNow, like you can claim that they're like the developer portals of the past, CMDBs, that have a $160 billion market cap, paving the way for the next generation developer portals to disrupt the trillion-dollar markets. So let me leave you with one thing. How fast are your teams shipping, your teams or your portfolio companies? Because if the answer is not up to your standards, you know to call. Thank you very much.